All right, 6:30, let's call Finance Administration Committee meeting to order. If the administrator will note attendance and unless your objections, excuse Chair Mayhew.
Sounds fine with me.
All right, let's move on with the agenda. Let's go to approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or modifications to the agenda as presented?
No.
I have none either. Let's go ahead and move on through the agenda. At this stage, we will entertain public comments for any of those online or present who wish to speak before the committee. If you're online, please raise your hand. And I don't see any hands in the room, and nor do I see any hands in Zoom, so I will assume no public comments tonight. With that, we'll move forward with approval of the minutes from June 7th, 2022. At this stage, I have no modifications or comments regards to the agenda.
No.
We'll proceed on then. Unless your objections, we will consider the minutes approved as presented. If no objections, split it be. From there, we'll move on to claims approval report dated June 21, 2022. I have no comments or questions in regards to these.
No, we don't.
No. All right, so claims report will proceed forward as presented. No noted issues or questions from the committee. Move to agenda bills. Agenda bill 22074 financial management policy. Will there be anybody introducing and talking to this bill tonight before the committee?
Our Finance Director Jen Ferguson will be introduced.
Good evening, Chair and Council Member. Tonight is a discussion of the proposed Agenda Bill 22-074 Financial Management Policy Updates. Over the past several weeks, staff had provided, and this should be in the packet, a compilation of the various current financial policies. They exist in a number of, whether there's a resolution, there is financial policy related Snoqualmie Municipal Code, and those have been combined for the committee's review. We've also provided proposed financial management policy that is endeavors to combine, consolidate, update language in financial policy statements of a financial nature. And that was provided to the committee at their last committee meeting. And it was also provided to the full council in advance for study because it is a document of a bit over 30 pages. And so nonetheless, the goal at the last F&A committee was for council members to have an opportunity to review the proposed new policy and to have that a discussion. I'm happy to answer any questions of the committee tonight. There are some general changes. It's not a red line version because current policy is in a variety of forms, but nonetheless, there are some proposed fund balance reserve designations for the general fund, enterprise funds, special and capital funds, as well as internal service funds. And there are policy statements in Section 2 that reference what the council would do in the case of excess reserves over a target, or in the case of reserves falling under that target, and having to replenish those reserves. The proposed financial management policy has sections that refer to revenues and revenue objectives of the council. It has sections and policy statements that guide the establishment of a fee schedule, cash management policy statements, grants management, and of course, donations and gifts. On the expenditure side, again, there are objectives that the council would be setting, purchasing standards, purchasing authorization. There is a commitment authority. One major change is that this commitment authority is currently identified in municipal code. What's proposed is that this same matrix would be moved into financial policy, and there are proposed minor increases to authority, and that's listed in that matrix. Also, in the expenditure section is a section with regards to the methods with which we might purchase. One more modern program for purchasing is the use of a purchasing card program. Currently, we have a credit card program that's a bit outdated, inefficient, and purchasing card programs are something that most local governments use with regards to buying materials and supplies. The section in the proposed financial management policy referring to budget, again, sets objectives and principles. The scope of the budget identifies cost allocation as a part of your budgeting work, describes budget amendments and how they would be handled by the council as well as the administration. Policy sections or statements about maintenance and replacement, and budget reporting. And later tonight, there is an agenda item to share a sample of what that reporting might look like. The other sections in the proposed financial management policy include capital budgeting. There are proposed statements with regards to capital improvement plan criteria and ranking, project source and use identification, and then of course the CIP planning process. One identified change I wanted to point out is that the CIP updates are proposed to shift into a biennial review that is aligned with the budget. And then we've got sections on debt management. Those are sections that identify the purpose and when the council would issue debt. Investments is another section. This is somewhat of a similar policy to the separate current Council's investment policy resolution 559, and there isn't a number. There isn't a fair amount of change here. Investment policy is guided by the state of Washington, and so there are essentially just updated narrative in the proposed policy. Long-term financial planning is a section in the proposed policy. The old policy content regarding forecasting, and in the beginning of the section, this is the proposal where we would shift to a forecast, a financial planning model that's longer term, perhaps 10 to 20 years in nature. In the accounting, auditing, and internal control section, one of the major proposed changes would be capital asset threshold. The proposed policy sets a target for this threshold. And then, of course, new policy proposes that the ER&R is updated every 2 years, again, similar to the biennial budget timeframe, so that we're looking at these major plans on the same cycle. Risk management is a small section in this proposed financial management policy, and then there is a section for performance management. This is essentially a placeholder for implementation of a performance management program and its measures which would need to be developed. Those are some of the major sections within the proposed policy. Would be the city council would essentially put this into the entire council's hands for discussion, and we would propose that the adoption of any financial management policy would be done through ordinance. And I am happy to answer any questions of the committee.
Well, first. Wanted to paraphrase some feedback from, Councilman Mayhew and grab that real quick. Just be aware, so Chairman Mayhew has, expressed some concerns that many of these changes would alter how funds are used and fund balances that are maintained in comparison to current policies. And he's concerned that we are doing this at the same time we're starting to get into budget conversations. So it won't help us with that conversation to change the rules in mid-play. And I'm paraphrasing there, those are my words. And I kind of asked the same thing. I see the financial policies, everything, but I may not, I'll use the term that I may have to explain, I may not drop what it does. So I guess I'm really looking for if somebody can take the prior biennial and then give me an example of a new financial policy and tell me how it would change our prior budget as we lead into discussions on our new budget, so I can understand the impacts of some of these. I do have some concerns. I've expressed already, I'm uncomfortable with some of the shifts in regards to reserves. You may need to take me along that conversation, or I may still struggle with it. So would it be possible to get, as I said, take our current biennial budget as is, break the changing financial policies up and say, here's policy A. And if I apply that to our current biennial budget, this is how it would shift. So you don't really understand what is the change of the adoption of this new policy.
So if I could just clarify with regards to the reserve and fund balance section. So you're looking for the example with regards to the current budget and layover and provide an example of how reserve targets would impact the current biennial budget. Is that correct, sir?
I'm just, and impact, not for what we do, how it would change. Given whatever policy, whether it's reserves or debt level or whatever, how does that change how would that, if applied, how would that change our current biennial budget? What would the effect be?
Certainly. The proposed wouldn't change debt level. And so with regards to what's been proposed in the capital improvement plan, the proposed policy on debt would not change anything. Now, reserve targets, we could certainly show the reserve targets for the general fund. What's proposed in financial management policy is a range of the 15 to 20%, and that is at the council's discretion. So the goal of the policy, if the council wouldn't be comfortable with that proposed range, we could, the council could set that at a level that they deemed sufficient, but we could provide that example and comparison.
Mayor?
So Jen, do you know what's the current rate as compared to the proposed?
Well, there are two, with regards to the general fund, the current contingency reserve fund is 5% of unrestricted general fund resources to a maximum of 0.375 cents per thousand assessed value. There's also cash flow reserve fund target of 10% of general fund unrestricted resources. And then there is an operating reserved fund target of 5% of general fund unrestricted resources. So as a quick example, cash flow reserve target and operating reserve target of 10 and 5% total 15%. So what we would show in a comparison would be what would the general fund look like with more set aside in reserves.
So is the new financial policy proposing a higher level of reserves or a lesser level of reserves?
It's proposing it's proposing a range. The minimum that's proposed is 15%, which is what is current in those two cash flow reserve fund target and operating reserve fund target. The proposed financial management policy suggests the range, but no less than 15%.
So if you did a range, when would you pick the 20% over the 15%?
Well, the range is proposed so that the council essentially wouldn't have to shift every time we bumped up against maximum. If it went to 18%, then there wouldn't necessarily need to be council action. Certainly the financial management policy suggests that if the council wishes to use excess reserves, they could do that. The policy also suggests if the reserve target, or if we go below the reserve target, then they would need to, in the next budget cycle, find solutions to bring us back into range.
So my engineering head has a hard time with language. It's soft thinking. Much rather we say we should target and have a minimum of X percentage. If we go over that, we go over that, fine. But I don't know what I don't have anything that if I get 18% that forces me to do anything.
But it keeps you from being too conservative, where you might have a finance director that would have it at 25%. And then you have funding there that is not unnecessary, where you can actually apply it to other things. That's why you would have the minimum and maximum.
If the council wishes to set one target, that's certainly okay. Some communities set a range, some communities set a hard target. That's the council's prerogative.
So I was just going to add, I think what we had talked about previously with council is potentially a risk assessment, as well as see kind of what the level of comfort is in terms of a percentage, right? I think within the range that's provided there, you guys might end up somewhat similarly if you're to conduct that risk assessment. So this is providing us with that capacity, right? Potentially in order to do that. We could also over time assess things like the volatility of our revenue sources. So property taxes are relatively stable, but other sources, if you happen to generate, say, more sales tax over time with a tourism plan or who knows what, that may require us to reassess exactly what that number is, and so a range itself may prevent us from coming back constantly to do that. We would just maybe, as part of our discussion overall with council, say, okay, this is what our kind of revenue pie is gonna look like, so we're gonna actually go up a few percentage points, for example. to reach that.
Okay, but
I definitely see the concerns on both sides. I think that in that case, that a range may be helpful, just to avoid the back and forth, but I do. I do feel about that.
So,
If I'm understanding your original question, Councilmember Holloway, the concern is, are we what impact would we have on the current budget if we were to implement this new policy? And what I'm hearing is that the minimum amount of reserves would stay at 15%. That there would not be a change.
right, and, but, you're right, except policies instead of policies. You know, generate a list 1 through X, so here are our new policies. Number 1, this is the impact it would have on the current budget. Number 2, this is how it would shit, so we can really understand. You know, oh, reserve policy, really, it doesn't affect the reserve balance. It's 15%, it is 15%. Great, sign me up. But I can't just from seeing text in here that says, we're gonna have a reserve policy of this, I need help making that leap of what I had to what I'm being proposed and what the change is. I don't do Snoqualmie budget day to day. I have other things that keep me busy.
So if I'm understanding, what you're looking for is essentially a table that would list, here's the policy, here's the new policy, here's the old policy, here's what one or the other would have done to the budget.
So if I were to generate it, we used to show our budget as kind of a 1 page with the accounts. Going there would be, here's our 2019 or 2020, 2021 biennial budget. Here's the policy. Here's that same budget with that policy applied. Okay, and I don't know if you want to do cumulative or you want to do in isolation, but then go down the list of here's what we had, here's how it will change. And then I can understand what is the effect of what is being asked
In the real world.
in the real world. Given that, I think I just asked for probably way too much homework. Drew has not screamed at me yet. It's coming. I mean, is the intent that these financial policies will be used as a basis for the upcoming biennium?
That's why it's all on budget calendar. And so that it'll be used for the budget. We've been talking about doing financial policies for a very long time.
I know, now we're getting into the meat of things. And
We have someone willing to do them.
do you feel where the chair has question, you know, that's really his question of, do we do these both at the same time, or do we just do our next biennial and then do the financial policies? Or if we can do the policies similar to the manner we're talking about, so we can really understand the effect, and then do the biennial, but let's not do them both at the same time. Okay, we just need to be a sequence of events so that we can understand what the path we're on. Given what I'll call the homework assignment I just did of tell me the effect on the current biennial budget of the policies being suggested here, is the schedule up on the screen still reasonable?
With this request for detail tonight, we may have to consider, because we'd be bringing this back to the next F&A committee. So we would have to bump those dates for your review. And we would have to provide a revised calendar then. Could push it out for another month or so. Our discussions previously were that the council would be considering financial policy then prior to going into that biennial budget session. However, as the committee knows, is that the budget is adopted and the mayor would be presenting the budget in August. So could essentially, we would certainly work to prepare this comparison table so that we could stay on track schedule wise, but eyes wide open, perhaps another month out is a possibility.
Well, might I suggest, like, let's take a chunk of the policies. Bring the comparison, bring that back in here in FA in 2 weeks. And the council following that, let's take that same presentation to the council. So let's bring the council, do it in parallel, bring the council along with the conversation. So maybe it's just once we get out of swing, we have to add a council committee cycle to this calendar, but I think we have a chance of not taking the whole month you're talking about.
Yeah.
Let's just shift this out one cycle. Bring a chunk of the policies for F&A discussion in 2 weeks. And then the council take that same chunk. And I'm proposing 2 chunks. Take that same chunk to council, get council buy-off on that. Then come back with the remainder of the policies, have a discussion in F&A. And then take that last remainder of policies and get council buy-off. Which I believe would be the 20, I don't know, calendar, whatever, 2 weeks from the 27th is. That was probably the 20, no, it's not July 25th. Why is there that gap in that? There should be the early July meeting. Like back up, there should be a meeting on, take 14 off that, July 9th, should be a council meeting.
So we may have other activities, for example, planned for you on that date, such as the CIP itself.
You're just not telling me?
Right, so as a part of the budget calendar, I do think we have possibly a CIP discussion that we want to, hold with you on that day, and so we're doing some things here to overlap, and where do we need to spend more of our time, and that potentially could be that date in July, so.
Okay, so let me do it this way as opposed to trying to engineer my. Take what I proposed and breaking it up into chunks and doing it here, bring council along and figure out what the schedule will be to support that. I don't need to try and drive that for you guys. Thank you. I do a lot of the job on this stuff.
So there's this packet of big, right, we've taken all this from previous policies and procedures and just put it into one. And so, I mean, how many percent of reserves and stuff are there, like a handful?
Yeah, so there's a handful, right? For example, actual policies addressing this itself, and so as a part of what Councilmember Hall is requesting, that might be relatively simple as for us to investigate for the most part. There may not necessarily be any sort of changes right or to the current budget if we were to adopt a new policy. So I think going through that would be a good exercise overall, just so the council could see the impacts.
If we could do that in one cycle, great.
I would say in terms of the policies, so we do have our current set of policies that were last updated, in 2008 or sometime around that time frame, right? For example, Jen has introduced a new set of policies overall with this, and so there are going to be differences from what you've seen in the current document. It's just not a compilation necessarily of the past. It's also an update of that past material too.
I think that would be really helpful to have, especially as we're going into the conversation with all councils, just to know after the document that shows you immediately what the changes are. Because otherwise, just trying to track from, the 6 documents from 196 pages, and whatever, 5 times.
Yeah.
It's hard to go back and forth and figure that out if you're not.
It is a sea change, and I would agree with you. Personally, I don't think we're going to be able to do like a red-line copy.
Yes,
necessarily.
no.
So that-
Absolutely,
Yeah.
I don't think that's what anybody. That's the thing. The bullet just shows like, these are the substantive changes, this is what would happen to the numbers and how we currently calculate things to make it reasonable.
I mean, if 90% of it just means we're moving this from from a financial policy off the side to ordinance.
Yeah.
And other than that, there's no change. That'll relieve a lot of concern out of the council.
Yeah.
So, and yes, if we can do this in one cycle, great. I didn't want you to yell at me this morning.
No,
And I thought I was
I mean,
asking.
this is a very worthwhile, exercise for us, and so, it does take more time than it should, because this is essential, right, for the finance department to get through this, so we will spend as much time as we need with you, council members, in order for us to actually adopt some new financial policies overall for the city, so it's critical, mission critical, I think, for the finance department to do something like that. If we need more time, we will make sure to devote more time to this, so.
And then when, for the council coming up, I guess I ask you to change it to a discussion item so that we can inform the council of this discussion we had right here. And if you've got a revised schedule at that stage, we can inform them of that. And this is our plan for moving forward with the policies in understanding and bringing them along with us in that understanding and proceeding to adoption. Thank you. Keep stealing my agenda. We're gonna go, oh, yeah, agenda bill 22071. Indigent Defense Services Agreement. Did I pronounce that name right?
Yes.
Was there, again, we requested modifying agreement to provide a 2-year agreement with potential for 2-year renewal term, 6 years.
Yeah, cybersecurity.
Right, so I assume that change was made. Any impact to cost of the agreement?
Change to go from a one-time payment to an annual for 4 years was made. The budget impact, I think of that change was around a couple $1,000. True, have a final number, but, we budgeted 60,000 a year, and it's going to be about 91,000 each year. We have fund savings because of our staffing level, so we won't have to ask for any additional funding this year. True.
So, but I heard two entirely separate things in my head. First, you said it was a couple of thousand, and then you mentioned that it was 30,000 a year, was it 60 to 90,000 a year in changing this to an annual versus a lump sum?
Yes, sir. The original total was 391,000. I think the current total for the 4 annual payments turns out to 394. 364. 364. Before or after?
Well, I don't have the three.
Okay.
So
The original number I had in there was 361
the 361
to
for
360.
the total would come from 361 to 364.
To split it into 4 equal payments. With a different method.
Is that 364 annually or total?
No, sir. Total for the 4 years.
Okay, so it is just a couple of.
Yes, sir. Sorry.
When you threw 60 and 90, you got my interest. Okay. I think at least for what was kind of requested here for being able to manage that relationship, that it's probably worth a couple of $1,000. Cool. Okay. Anything else? Maybe questions of the council for right now. Okay, good, we're good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so that was 2271 comprehensive financial policy update. Did,
ARPA briefing.
Yeah, ARPA briefing. Oh, I'm not sure, again, we have limited restrictions on the remaining ARPA funds outside of what we've already decided that, or
Right.
we're in the process of deciding to allocate. And I think the chair really wanted to have a conversation of what we do with that and subsequent ARPA funds. Millions. Oh, okay, let's go for it. I can shut up.
All right, thank you, Chair, and good evening, Council. So we're going to discuss today kind of the use of the unallocated funds from the American Rescue Plan Act. Next slide, please. Just to give you a bit of a background, city is scheduled to receive $3.8 million in funds from the American Rescue Plan Act. We received the first tranche last year in June, and we're actually scheduled to receive the second tranche this year of roughly $1.9 million. As council may know, the city has been engaged in a process to allocate ARPA funds to the community that have been negatively impacted by the pandemic. And with the community allocation process nearing council approval, the administration, both of you have served on that ARPA committee, so I want to thank you for that. The administration is seeking council feedback regarding on how to allocate the remaining funds. Now, just to get into a bit of the final treasury rule, a little bit here, next slide, please. The city has elected to apply the ARPA funds under the revenue loss eligible use category. There were 3 other categories, but we don't necessarily need to get into those. And under this eligible use category, the city has broad latitude to use the funds for government services. Government services is a really broad term, but it may include things like the maintenance or pay-go funding of building of infrastructure, including roads, modernization of cybersecurity, including hardware, software, and protection of critical infrastructure, health services, environmental remediation, school or educational services, and the provision of police, fire, and other public safety services. Now, that's very wide-ranging, and what they say is you're not limited by that definition of the examples that provided there. So, fact is, government services can encompass quite a bit. The reason why that's important is because that gives council, say, the broad latitude to use our unallocated funds for multiple things. But before that, I want to go to the next slide regarding our current thinking on the distribution of ARPA funds. So we've got this table here of the American Rescue Plan Act funds. And as you can see, we've got our community allocations at the top, where we are bringing to you an agenda bill, I believe, next Monday, roughly equal to $950,000 in total. $200,000 of that was for residential support. Small business support is equal to roughly $500,000, and the remaining community allocation portion to organizations is roughly $250,000. Now that leaves the remaining portion of our ARPA funds. If you can think of, well, plates, we've been working through the first quarter. Now we kind of focus on the other 75% of our total ARPA distribution. Well, we've already had a discussion regarding supporting our general governmental operating bucket. And we did that during the the retreat, where we provided council with a financial forecast. And I will get into a couple of charts with you here soon. But then also, that is up roughly equal to $2 million. So when you take that $2 million, as well as the $950,000 that we're allocating towards the community, and you subtract that from our total ARPA funds that we're expecting to receive, that leaves you roughly about $850,000 of unallocated funds right now. So we don't mind going on to the next slide. And then the next one, thank you. So talking about the operating fund support, that $2 million that you saw in the previous table, we produced this financial forecast chart, this 6-year financial, actually through 2028. So that's about, not 6 years, it's longer than that. Yeah. To you. And what you're going to notice, you're going to see our expenditures start to exceed our revenues in roughly about 2025. Well, in order to help us reach that point, we've included the $2 million as a part of our kind of green revenue line. If you go back one slide, please. in the line that you see here, which is why it's curved or shaped the way it is because you've got a distribution of $2 million over a 3-year period included in that green line, our revenue line that you see here. You can go on to the next slide. This one shows you when expenditures would start to exceed revenues if we don't incorporate that $2 million. And as you can see, it's a lot sooner. We would start seeing our expenditures exceed our revenues by about 2020 or next year, really. And so the reason why we've got $2 million of operating support overall is to help us push that curve out a little bit longer, gives us additional time to think of or develop the strategies necessary in order to help us get through this time period and push that curve out further. Next slide, please. This was the table that we had produced at the retreat. I've highlighted a row in yellow, basically where it says ARPA transfer in. We would transfer in, or what we had proposed at the retreat was transferring in roughly $750,000 into our operating funds for 2022, $750,000 transferring into our ARPA or into our operating funds in 2023, and another $500,000 transfer in 2024. Now, the question you might have is, well, how is the city using the $750,000 that we're going to allocate this year, for example, from ARPA in 2022? And so if you don't mind going on to the next slide. Our intention is to use the $750,000 to support the ARPA coordinator this year. The vaccine incentive policy, which council adopted at the end of last year, which provides staff with the extra holidays, for example, number of amendments, what do you call it, or but memos, MOUs, right, were negotiated with the unions, and so that is kind of the result of that. But then that also could potentially generate some additional overtime and so on that we need to kind of support. It also goes towards the hiring incentive bonus policy for hard to fill positions at the city as well. Council adopted that relatively, I don't know, a couple months ago, we should say, and that's equal to roughly $100,000. And then basically the remaining portion of the $750,000 can go to supplant other sources of revenue that would support, say, our public safety wages and benefits or Parks and Streets operations and maintenance. You know, we know that we've had kind of a maybe a time period that's been relatively rough in terms of staffing resources overall, and so it's generating a lot of overtime in the police department in order to make sure that we can provide the same level of service coverage to the city. And so you can think that this money would be going towards to support a lot of that as we try to ramp back up, achieve higher staffing levels at this point, and then really kind of get going into the future. So yes,
so hiring incentive bonus, that's a plus up to the existing budget. Public safety wages and benefits, are we proposing increasing those or offsetting expenses there by $235,000?
great word, offsetting.
Offsetting. Okay.
Offset, yes.
And same thing with streets and parks, that would be an offset of $250,000. Okay.
Yep. So next slide, please. So in terms of that $850,000 that we could discuss as part of that earlier table, we want to maybe set up some, or at least provide council with some potential guiding principles of how we want to potentially proceed with that $850,000 from unallocated funds. So the administration would propose potentially using the unallocated funds to protect levels of service during a challenging time economically, the staffing shortages. Principle number 2 that you see here is use the unallocated funds to invest in systems that will reduce the city's operating expenditures over the long term. And then also use the unallocated funds to enhance the city's ability to generate sustainable revenue over the long term. So in terms of, we have a multiplier effect, in essence, if we were to spend this money on some of these objectives that we might get to here shortly. For example, you may be able to help generate additional revenue that will carry us into the future and help to drive out that curve, our expenditures exceeding the revenues, but also we can help to reduce our operating expenditures over the long term. We can use that one-time money to reduce our operating expenditures, such as technology purchase, and we'll get into that a little bit as well. That can help to also extend that expenditure per hour, at least reduce that expenditure curve, so we're not seeing that break point at 2025, or maybe 2027 and so on. So with that said, we've had some discussions. Next slide, please. not only internally, but also with council over time about how we may want to use that $850,000 bucket of unallocated funds. Some of the considerations that we had at the 2021 council retreat was restoring one-time appropriations removed from the 21-22 biennial budget. Things such as the enterprise content management software, which would support the city with its public records requests, maybe a broadband feasibility study, facilities maintenance and renovation plan, which would help us to plan out when we need to replace certain assets and buildings, but also a comprehensive fee study. All four of those things were removed from the 2021-2022 biennial budget, but we could potentially use the ARPA funds to bring those things back, and that could help us support some of those guiding principles that I just mentioned. In addition to that, there could be some information technology improvements that we can use the funds for. I think we all potentially know about the difficulties here in council chambers in terms of hearing. We've got a hybrid setup right now, but there are designs to actually make this or improve this, our situation here. And I know Kevin's got a few of those ideas, and he's probably addressed a few of those ideas with you. But we had just discussed cybersecurity services, and so there are funds that support us through that, making sure that we're protected. And especially in this 4-year period, if council approves the agenda bill next Tuesday, there could also be conference room technology retrofits too, to make us more accessible by Zoom in certain places, having the screens and present monitors necessary for us to conduct decent presentations would also be very good. And then also security infrastructure around the building itself. I don't think I necessarily need to get too much into that. But also, in addition to not only restoring maybe some of those one-time appropriations, but also be information technology improvements, but also maybe considering second round community allocations as well, depending on what the needs are in this community. All right, with that said, could you please move on to the next slide? What we've got in front of you here is your city council priorities chart. I know it's hard to see, but we just want to show a snapshot. It's not for reading necessarily up here. But also this is an opportunity to potentially use these unallocated funds to support maybe some of the objectives council has over time. We know that there's a number of priorities, and I'm going to start reading this, but encouraging economic vibrancy, bolster neighborhood usability, invest in transportation infrastructure, enhance quality of life, assure a safe community, and ensure fiscal transparency and operational stability. So if we're thinking about encouraging economic vibrancy, maybe one of those concepts is a tourism plan, for example. If we have a tourism plan, we can potentially implement that tourism plan and help to generate the sustainable revenue to protect the city over the long term. And so those are some of the ideas that you may come out with as you continue to review your priorities and some of those action items that you might have, where this money could be applied to those objectives and help us in the future. So with that said, next slide, please. Just to give some next steps. So we're hoping to have just kind of a discussion broadly today about how to allocate maybe the $850,000 as suggested by the chair, previous F&A committee. We've also kind of addressed maybe some principles that will help to guide how to use the unallocated ARPA funds, and we appreciate the community support, or maybe some additions or comments regarding that. We would hope to discuss or have a discussion about how to establish a process using the ARPA Council Committee to help determine how to use the unallocated ARPA funds. And then also after that, we hope after those discussions to actually convene the process itself so that we can figure out what to do next. All right. So with that is the presentation. I appreciate your attention. I didn't take up too much of your time. Thank you.
Go back where we had that the dollar allocations for
So slide 4. That one?
the one where we specifically talked about things we could do. Maybe it's down.
Slide 10. 10.
Oh, go back up that one. Go back up. One more. That one right there. All right. Let's the ARPA coordinator was that in our biennial, or is that a new item to the biennial?
That is a, new item to
Yeah,
that.
so we'll add the expenditure and add the revenue. This becomes neutral as far as affecting, revenue versus expense. I assume the same thing for the incentive. The vaccine incentive plan was not in our biennial, so this will just be a neutral expenditure. What I'm really looking for is you were kind of, you had mentioned is what are things we could do that either long-term reduce expenditures or potentially new revenue, so that again, we can push that, the crossing of that curve out. And these are all, neutral changes. They won't move, they really don't move the line. Matter of fact, you'll have to pull the line back a little bit.
Yeah.
Because you were assuming these funds would actually go against the existing expenditures and be new funds. Okay. So, and part of the discussion, if I were to focus what to do with Rocco, would be like those things. How do we, what are investments we can do for long-term efficiencies to reduce expenditures or, long-term effect that would increase revenue?
I think, part of the reason why we've got these three items included here is, one of the principles that we have kind of previously or just discussed a little bit was using the unallocated funds to protect levels of service. This is kind of a protecting the level of service. We have to.
Yeah,
make sure
I'm
that
not
we're- Yeah,
arguing that these are bad things.
Yeah.
I'm just discussing the effect of them.
yeah.
The effect.
Right,
of
you're right.
That 750K
It
is,
is now less
Neutral.
than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of pushing up the curve, right? Yeah.
and matter of fact, as neutral, like I said, if you assume the 750 we're pushing up that curve, you gotta pull that back. So yeah, you were doing 750, and 500, so this may actually be, pull that back 1 year. And the lines cross. And I
I
guess
mean, so we've had things such as salary savings over time as well. Some of those salary savings could also support some of the items that you see up here too,
Yeah, that.
right? So for the most part, even though ARPA might be, that just means you're not using maybe some of those salary savings that would have gone towards, say, the vaccine incentive policy or the hiring incentive and bonus policy, right? That can now just be kind of held in reserve, right, for the most part. So,
right, but hopefully those expenditures go back.
right. But the cash,
Dude.
the cash that you're generating as a result of not spending
Yeah.
as much on those personnel, for example, could then be just held in reserve, and you're just using ARPA funds for these objectives instead of using those salary savings to fund this. But part of the reason why we've got this on the list here is because we've actually mentioned using ARPA funds for like these things specifically. So we want to make sure to bring that to your attention.
Okay, so I guess my question then is, as we're going forward from here, are we looking at specifically, or are we being asked to consider how to spend the next $750,000 and then the next $500,000, or are we?
So if we can go back to slide 4. I think first off, I'm really thinking that we need buy-in in terms of maybe using the $2 million for this operating fund support. Right, overall, we presented it as a part of our financial forecast at the retreat, but we didn't necessarily, I'd say obtain a vote, right, regarding that whatsoever, if that's what you want to do, with potentially upwards of $2 million. So that would be one objective is, council, are you okay with us using that money basically to help supplant maybe other revenues that would go to support some of our activities, as discussed, like public safety wages and benefits and parks and street maintenance, and then help us to keep that curve out until 2025. But then also, what are we going to do with the 850 on that third line, right? The unallocated funds as well. That's something that we might want to spend more quickly than the operating fund support. And so that's why we're addressing maybe some guiding principles for how we would then use that money, and also provide some examples of what that could be used on. for example. And so that's where maybe more the work is gonna come from this council committee overall. This ARPA committee is, what do we do with the $850,000 from here into the future?
And that list we looked at prior, and this may be where we needed the council. Is that in the 2 million or is that in the 856?
So if we can go forward just a bit. Couple slides, next one, next one. Next one. So this is just to tell you how we're using $750,000 currently, right?
Right, but
Provided they-
that's part of the 2 million.
That's part of the 2 million, correct? Yep. Mhm. And then if we go on to the next one, so you can see the header changes up there. If you go on to the next slide, please. That's when we start discussing the 850. So I could probably put, in parentheses up there at the header.
Well, and those ought to be, like I said, those ought to be able to focus on cost efficiency, other generating long-term revenue. To further push that, the effect of that 2 million out prior to.
Yeah. Right, and so, we're asking, do these principles make sense to you? Do you want to add to that list overall? Do you want to subtract something from that? And then how should we proceed in terms of, are we in agreement that our ARPA council committee will be the best approach to this situation? Do we need to have a discussion with full council? Do we bring that presentation, this presentation to them? Have a discussion at that level, or how shall we proceed? Or should the administration come back and kind of give you kind of maybe a bit of a charter, for example, about how to potentially milestones and so on, about how we want to take this into the future? I don't know. The mayor has any thoughts, or?
I think we need further directions. I think on slide 10, we have several different options we can look at. There are certain things where even from the previous biennial budget, such as like the comprehensive fee study, that's something that really needs to be done during this next biennial budget. And then fill small, all that stuff. So, and then upgrading the AV council chambers, they were also going to do the same thing in all the council, conference rooms, yes. So that we can have hybrid meetings there. So I think it's easy to spend this almost $900,000
Yeah,
on infrastructure and security.
I think maybe the mayor is suggesting that we would bring the list back then and have maybe a proposal.
Is that what you're there?
Well, yeah, it's, I mean, more formal proposal, I guess.
But how much is that?
Yeah, having
Yeah,
some kind of an idea of how much all of these items are gonna cost, so that we can figure out like what would even make sense, what we could actually afford with the funds that are available. And then I think it'd be helpful to bring it to full council, just because, there are like committees sitting right now, but we can set the other ones.
Well, and more people throwing out ideas, we might read something like that. I'm cautious of this list again. These things will be neutral as far as affecting the budget versus expenses current. If you spend money here, you're adding the expense, you're adding the money, it's neutral, it goes away. So it will be short-term benefit. But I don't have counter proposals. Let's put a tree house in visitor information center and we'll generate X number of $1 million a year. David.
Some more information on the sort of helpful.
Yeah, because I'd like to, I'd like to see the idea. The meeting guys, enabling meeting rooms for, enabling meeting rooms for Zoom to protect. That's the life I live. It's not a big expenditure, $300 a month. But you may have other ideas, want to hear them.
IT is laughing. IT is laughing.
That's you laughing, I know.
Right, I mean, there's other options such as, we were talking with the merchant, you know, there's some community development things that you can do, such as put down one street and allow dining out there, or music writing, other things you could do that perhaps would spur maybe more tourists to, or serve businesses, retail and restaurants and things like that, so there's a variety of things that we decide. Where you want to go.
And as far as next steps, can we take this, let's take this presentation to council. One, to make them aware, and two, to start planting seeds of, hey, got any good ideas?
Right.
And then what other, but you still want to talk next? Yeah. Can we hold the next steps till the next committee meeting? I really want to hear how the council conversation goes. I think we ought to do some form of body to go talk about it. I'm just not sure what that is. I'd like to get the feedback from council, based on the presentation. Does that sound reasonable?
I'll be out next week, so just fair warning, might be someone else presenting if that's the case.
Okay.
The briefing is gonna be.
The administration is catching up with your vacation plans. Yes, if you can brief Jen or somebody to, do it.
Might as well do it from where I am, so we'll see.
Okay. As long as we're not interfering with your time with the family. The city will go on. We will just,
We can have a later meeting. So,
if,
it's not on the
okay,
current
we
agenda
could,
for next
yeah,
time.
okay. If that's amenable, I have a tendency to push as far as on the schedule right now. But if it's agreeable, we can do this on the.
I don't even know, especially because we've been really busy.
Yeah,
All of the city
I would
stuff,
prefer you
history
to do
stuff, like, and I agree with their holiday.
Do not call in.
Okay, thank you.
enjoy the holiday, come back, but you know this material, we prefer that you do the presentation. Thank you. Not thank you. Thank you. Good to see you.
Appreciate your time.
All right, we have, quarterly financial performance reporting. Was there material to actually show, or was that just a discussion? Okay. And who would talk for this?
That would be me. I just was looking to see if you were ready.
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
All right, thank you, sir. So tonight, this item is for discussion. Staff was asked to bring back an example of a template, if you will, of a financial quarterly performance report. And so we've put together a sample, and the purpose for tonight is to review this with you and to gather your input, letting us know what feedback you might have in the proposed reporting format. And so I can do a brief overview of the sample that's been presented. Something you'd like to do?
Well, I guess I'd make an offer of choice. I think you'll get most of your feedback from the chair of the committee, not me. He's not in attendance tonight. So I don't think we can close on this conversation tonight. We should close next committee meeting, assuming chair attendance. My question from there is, do you want to go through this twice? You want to go through this once? If you want to go through it once, why don't we shift this to our next committee meeting?
That's certainly fine.
Mayor, would that be okay?
Oh, yes, it's fine.
Thank you for your opportunity. I don't want you to have to do it twice. A non-value added activity. Let's do it with the charity. All right, and then next on the agenda. Change your title here.
This was something that, excuse me, that council member Mayhew, wanted to bring back to the committee to discuss. So perhaps this is something similar to the financial quarterly, report that you'd like to bring it back when he's present.
Let's move to the next one. Yes, okay, thank you. To other items on the agenda. I just can't operate without motion.
So the next thing on the agenda, sir, would be the draft city council meeting for June 27th.
Can we go ahead and review that?
That's up on the screen now. We have your round for the discussion at 6 p.m. The email was sent out last week, asking council to review the list of priorities.
Okay.
And then further down into the regular meeting.
Public hearing on the swearing ceremony. Yay. Principal minutes, approved plans reports, I proceed on down to. And public safety, you guys talked about the take home vehicle proposal.
We don't, correct. Recommend it as a whole for discussion.
Yeah, that's the council. All right, and then we'll do the 6-year transportation and improvement plan. Financial policy updates. Can we have that, again, this discussion? As a discussion item for our prior conversation?
Jen, do you think that you guys will be ready for that by the end of this week? It sounded like, for Drew. It sounded like you needed more time to create not a track change,
Well,
but a.
well, wait a minute. So that was gonna come back to committee before it went to council. This would probably be me blabbing. It just to tell them our discussion we had and kind of broad bones what the intended move forward is. If you have a schedule revision to go with that, it would be great. But I don't view, I'll move to the next one. That would be about it. It's a discussion item, true discussion item. Correct? Is that, or did I?
Yeah, so in essence, you asked for a revised budget calendar.
Yeah.
Because we had discussed potentially pushing this out just a little bit, from the feedback provided, with the detail requested, and so I think that's our intention is to bring this revised calendar.
Thank you.
So you'll be gone next week.
Yeah, but it's a revised calendar.
It's a revised calendar. It's a discussion. Nah, it's informational, not participatory. Participatory.
Chair, if I may,
Yes, ma'am.
I just want some clarification on this particular item. All we're bringing forward at the next meeting is a revised budget calendar. We're not bringing back policies for you to review. We'll bring back a revised calendar because we need more time to pull together the policy based on the information you were looking for, showing the changes from the.
So 2 parts. Part 1 would be proposed process moving forward for discussion and analysis of the financial policy. The second part is the revised financial calendar to support them.
Are both of those coming forward on the 27th?
Both would be part of the conversation, the discussion on the 22nd.
So in essence, we would bring the revised calendar and then we would have the discussion about. Right.
Yeah, here's the process, process of taking the existing biennial budget, applying the proposed policy to it, understanding the effect of that, working through the policies in committee and in council with the eventual goal, according to Drew's revised schedule, of adoption at some date.
If you're nodding yes, okay.
Yes, that's my understanding, but did that work in terms of?
I'm just telling you, and ask me to write it down.
Oh. The chair would be more than happy. to-
Send me an email.
Right, well, we can address it with the rest of the council.
Yeah.
We,
Kara, keep me honest.
Drew and I will put our heads together and figure out what this item's going to look like on the 27th.
Yeah, we can put together an agenda, basically, that have the revised calendar and additional content.
Next step.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear going into. the-
No, So, if you have any questions, you ask. This is this agenda and you guide us through the council on the spanking sausage. Next question on agenda bill 2264, we didn't discuss that, but are there any objections to doing that and consent? We didn't discuss whether it's on on the committee report or we do it as a consent item. I'm good with it going on consent. You did what we asked. It's actually, a couple $1,000. It's worth the change.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you'll make that change and put that on consent, please. All right, committee of the whole. We will continue our discussion on the ARPA appropriation authorization, small business community organizations, mayor report, committee liaison reports, and adjourn. Sounds good. Mayor, you leaning forward.
Those under. Yeah. Oh, that's minutes. The ARPA. That's minutes.
Yeah, minutes, warrants, and this one agenda bill item on the cybersecurity.
So I'm wondering, because you already had a couple meetings on it, something to the public and all council, if you want to push it to consent,
Push which to consent.
your AB 22-085 authorizations for small business organizations, right? You already had open discussion. Council.
We could, but we'll come off. So let's have the discussion. I think there's one more discussion to have, but I think we'll get to it. It's out here, okay. Okay, any other adjustments or changes to the agenda? Not? Yeah, so clerk will incorporate those. We're doing all that discussion. I believe that was the end of the agenda for tonight. Any objections to an adjournment? We catch 5 more minutes of sunshine. Everybody get out of here. We're done.